embed green practices into agile environment. So now I would like to introduce you to Dr. Casey Lafrance, a professor at Western Illinois University, and recognized as a global voice in the sustainable delivery. Also, a PMI Green Project Management Global Sustainability Champion and the creator of the target model of discretion. So, Dr. Casey Lafrance, that's now your turn. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And Dave, that was an incredible talk, some big shoes to fill. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what technical project managers, software project managers can take from green project management, especially the P5 standard. But we're going to explore that a little more holistically. We're going to go back to the roots of Agile. And I'm going to take you down to people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and the idea of humans being connected to nature. When we look at the P5 standard from Green Project Management, what we'll find is that we are able to align that with a lot of agile mindset principles and practices. And I'll
Casey,
explain why that.
one thing. We don't see the slides if you're trying to
Oh,
share them.
oh, I'm about to. I'm just prepping because I'm going to walk you through a garden.
Okay,
I'm going to walk you through a
thank you.
garden. I have a couple of case applications we're going to look at toward the end just to keep it from getting stale. Before that, though, just to set your minds why this is interesting to me. Um, so most recently, and I'll tell you a most recent story, and then I'll get into the origins of this, my childhood and stuff like that. But I was giving a talk as part of my role as a Green Project Management PMI Sustainability Champion to a PMI chapter. And I had a technical project manager after the talk raise their hand and they said, I recycle, but I don't think this is for me, right? I don't deal with squirrels or saving whales or saving the trees, right? And I think a lot of times when we think about sustainability, a lot of times when we think about green, our minds automatically go to biodiversity. They go to protecting waterways, things like that. Those are all important, but I think if we focus on those things, we do so at the expense of seeing the human connection that runs through all of the SDGs and all of sustainability. So with that in mind, I'll show you where I grew up. We'll have a little bit of a walk through where I grew up, and where I grew up was a town called Copper Hill, Tennessee. And this is what Copper Hill, Tennessee looked like. So Copper Hill was a copper mining town, and companies had come in and extracted copper ore, processed copper, shipped it. What I noticed growing up was a couple of things. First off, uh, the copper, when it was the, the product of the byproduct of extracting the copper ore, resulted in sulfuric acid going into the atmosphere, came down as acid rain, and it killed all the vegetation in about a 20-mile radius. This is what it looked like when I was growing up. And this is in the middle, just to give you a little perspective, of the Cherokee National Forest in Appalachia, right? So you have this beautiful national treasure juxtaposed against what became kind of a toxic waste dump. So when I grew up, this was an EPA Superfund site, and it looked like Mars, right? And starting to regenerate a little bit. But what I noticed with this wasn't just that the land was left discarded, barren, forgotten. The people were too. When they built roads in the area, they didn't build those roads to carry people or enable transport. They built those roads to carry resources, right? So, and there was a very clear one-way direction. The irony of this is there were some people who saw that this was unfair, that this was unsustainable, that this was not good for the people, like me. And they came in and they said, "We want to help you." And how they wanted to help me was by helping me to eliminate my accent from Appalachia so that I would be less distinct in the way that I spoke and blend in more, right? So, in helping me, what they wanted to do is have me assimilate to their values, right? And that's a story of extraction. That's a story of a lot of people that come in and say, I want to help, right? Henry David Thoreau, the transcendentalist, said, if I knew for a certainty that a man were coming for the express purpose of doing me good, I shall run for my life, right? So we're not talking about doing people good. We're talking about making decisions that are in the interest of more people, giving us all a seat at the table so that we're not on the menu. And we can see this in the overlap between agile development and sustainability, right? If you look at each of these dimensions, what we'll find is that they're all tied to the idea of learning. Right? Learning, and really what that requires is taking your little ego and hiding it, right? Letting it get somewhere away from you, because your ego can be the ultimate value stream blocker, right? If we think we know everything, if we think that our traditional approaches are always going to work, what that will do is two things. First, it will close us off to the possibility of being vulnerable enough to learn. And second, it might lead us to apply routine or traditional solutions to non-routine or wicked problems. And we hear a lot about that in the 21st century. We'll hear more about that, right? The game has changed when it comes to uh, product and project development and management. No organization operates as a silo or as an island. We're seeing less and less hierarchy and more heterarchy in the form of lateral networks of people, fluid participants, wicked problems, jurisdictional boundaries are a little fuzzy. So having the SDGs, having global recommendations or guidance in the area of sustainability is a way for us to have some structure, but still be able to adapt and contextually tailor solutions based on what the communities are saying that they need, right? So it comes down to humility and it comes down to science. And what I want you to take note of, especially here, when we talk about science, and I have the same problem that Dave had with some spelling on the slides. But if you look at science, what we're saying here with the PDCA cycle from quality management, I think you can tie that to quality software development, to sustainability. And we see that with the way that the ISOs are annexed through Annex SL of ISO 9001, the QMS. We see that linked to our sustainability management system, right? So the idea is quality. And what Deming teaches us is that quality is cyclical. We learn through doing. We plan, we do, we check. And I don't like the word check. I think study is a little bit more appropriate because check gives us that mindset that we're going to check a box. But when we're conducting this science, what we're trying to do is replace thoughts that exist. That's what science is about. Paradigm revolutions, according to Thomas Kuhn. It's not about standing on the shoulders of giants. It's not about a progressive accumulation of wisdom. And I think that's important to remember because it also helps us to remember our humanity. We're never going to reach a point where we accumulate wisdom, stacking turtles of knowledge to the sky, right? Instead, what we're going to see is better ideas and better conceptual models of the world that explain causal relationships, replace ones that no longer suit us. In order to do that, we have to be open-minded. And I think the big lesson with agility and sustainability, if I stop this talk right now, is humility. Recognizing that there's more to the world than just what's inside my head, right? There's more to the world than what goes on in my organization. And we're starting to see this manifested in double materiality considerations. We're starting to see it mandated through mandatory ESG reporting. And for those of you in the EU, you see this phased rollout with the CSRD that's going to eventually, I believe by 2028, include any company that does significant business in the EU, right? Um, and even little, we'll see later on, there are some many applications here. For instance, pair programming for ESG tagging, for XBRL tagging for these different ESG categories is one example of working agile into tactile, hands-on, on-the-ground sustainability. And we'll talk about a few others, one with estimation, one with wall planning and town halls. But the idea that I want you to carry away is this is all premised on being humble, being open, and being willing to iterate and learn. And that means we're going to have to discover some things that don't work. Some of our hypotheses aren't going to pan out. And I think what we do often is we focus so much on finding statistically significant relationships that we don't account for the fact that we're learning even when we find null findings, right? And I also think that sustainability thinking, agile thinking, they take us away from being so afraid to make a type 1 error that we do so at the exclusion of making more type 2 errors where there's value that we're not recognizing. Right. So if we talk about agility in this context with sustainability, we could tie that to evidence-based management's key value areas, right? What's our current value in terms of what we're doing, not just for the planet, not just for people, but for the product, the process, and prosperity long term, right? And notice here we're adding beyond the triple bottom line, we're adding product and process. So we're getting down to where the work actually takes place. Right? Scroll down one more here. We talk about value streams, right? This is a pretty good tactile example because a lot of lean thinking goes into agility, a lot of value stream management, right? This is modeled. A lot of times we use it so much that it becomes almost hyper real, right? The symbol that we use has replaced the thing that it's supposed to symbolize. So we have to be reminded that a value stream is actually something that we borrowed as a symbol from nature, right? We're talking about feeding that stream and removing impediments to flow. Organizations do the same thing. We're looking at ways to remove impediments to flow, and a lot of that's going to be tied to sustainability, right? Sustainable practices and human-centered practices. And we'll talk about that overlap in just a bit. One last look at the PDCA cycle and the scientific method. And then we'll look at these SDGs. And what you'll notice is that most of them have to do in some way, shape, or form with human beings. We talk about human-centered design, UX, UI, and agile. What we're saying is that we're being responsive to what people need, right? And what's interesting about this approach, if we look at it from the context of individuals with needs or legal rights, what we're not looking at individuals as is members of an aggregate group that just fall into obscurity or members of a data set, right? Just cases. We're giving a little bit more deference to the idea that we have an obligation not just to interest groups, not just to uh, these broader areas, but to individuals specifically. And we see that manifested in things like the GDRP, the new EU AI Act, to a lesser extent, NIST and some of the regulatory framework in the United States. Right? How does that line up with the P5 standard? Well, the P5 standard tells us that we want to look across these 5 dimensions to align sustainability practices for the goals. Now, the cool thing about the P5 standard, and the reason that I bring it up, this standard, along with the project sustainability reporting guide and a ton of other stuff, is available for free on GPM's website. Right? You get all kinds of tools and templates that you can use, but we're looking here across 5 dimensions rather than just our triple bottom line traditionally. And we'll see how that manifests, how that ties in just a second when we look at software developers, right? So I wrote this up in response to the question I received at the talk. And what I want to show you is just the first intro here. So we talk about people. In agile environments, we're talking about creating psychological safety. We want people to be able to challenge dominant logics, right? And the idea behind that, again, is paradigm revolution. We want better ideas to replace the ideas that are driving our decisions now. When it comes to planet, we're talking about stewardship, and this is probably what you would expect to hear, right? Things like the amount of emissions, product life cycle, data centers, right? There are a lot of things that we consider, and these probably are the most immediate relationships that people would make. I don't want us to get stuck just on there because, again, people, I think, is where we see a lot more of an emphasis. Prosperity, we're talking about long-term cost control. David mentioned that. Uh, the cool thing about sustainability is it asks us, it forces us to say, what's next? Right? We can't just stop and walk away because we have to consider what are the long-term impacts of the work that we've done. When you look at process and agility, we might be talking about pipeline architecture, policies, government shape. Right? Products, that's our life cycle, right? What are we doing to first off, have ethical supply chains, ethical value chains, ethical value streams, and produce products in a way that considers longevity of application, ease of maintenance, and ethical use of data. Right? So there are ways to align that pretty easily. Another lesson from nature, right? So again, I'm from Appalachia. What happens when trout get dumped into a stream from a hatchery? So when we have trout jump in from a hatchery, what happens is they're raised from fishlings, right, fingerlings, until they're large enough to survive in the wild. The hatchery truck dumps them out of the back of the truck, and they kind of freeze, right? They don't do anything for a couple of days, and you can kind of understand why. They had a floating buffet, now they don't. They have predators now that they didn't before. Right? And so a lot of that is acclimation. And if we look at that and say this fish is lazy, this fish is not being utilized appropriately, we're missing the point that that fish, just like us, requires some time to adapt, to adjust. David talked earlier about readiness, right? And I think with any change initiative, what I'll say from my own experience, right? Sometimes we learn by skinning our knees. And what I'll say is the first few change initiatives I was involved in, I wanted to go, right? I wanted to put my foot through the floor on the accelerator. What I didn't realize at the time that I do now is when you do that with a brick wall in front of you, all you do is run quickly into the wall. So we're not talking about speed here, we're talking about flow. We're talking about removing impediments and making informed decisions. And that might take a little bit more time on the front end, but what it's going to reduce on the back end is botched handoffs, delays, rework, right? And especially exposure to liability and social reputation, right? We also see that confidence and competence, right? We want our workers to be confident and competent. What are we talking about with confidence? We're talking about self-efficacy. I believe that my voice matters, right? Every human being's voice should matter according to a sustainability perspective, and that's also an agile perspective, right? We're back to psychological safety, creating conditions where people can express dissent, where they can express creatively, right? That's what agility is about. If you look at some hands-on applications, digital tagging, right? We're seeing more and more compliance shifting from voluntary compliance to mandatory, especially in the context of new EU regulations like the CSRD. So I'll walk you through just a little bit about how paired programming might fit in here, right? We're seeing fragmentation, and as a result, the reporting environment is giving us a situation in which the same underlying data may appear repeatedly in different formats. So our idea here is we have to reconcile what's going on in these different reporting schemes with the way that we're tagging our activities for reporting, right? And the idea behind that, individual data points within a report are going to be associated with this standard taxonomy or our list of ESG categories. So it doesn't replace existing frameworks, right? But what it does is it gives us the idea of how we can categorize our activities to more efficiently report, because we're going to have to be reporting much more frequently. Okay. So we end up with especially the CSRD, and from there, the need for XBRL. So we're tagging with XBRL, and what can we find about XBRL that ties in nicely with Agile here? Well, pair programming, but also you can approach ESG reporting as a coordinated enterprise initiative, right? So we're talking here about cross-function, breaking down silos. And in the course of having these conversations, you get to understand each other's work a little bit better, right? Cross-functional governance, disciplined data management. There's a lot we can learn from DevOps and creating conditions for continuous integration, continuous development, and continuous availability of feedback mechanisms and response, right? And then lastly, tracing data and using these taxonomies as structured dictionaries in Agile teams. Show you another example here of the ties in. How about estimation? How do we incorporate the P5 in estimation? Well, one way to do that is to have predefined categories for your wall planning. Before you even get to sizing, having predefined categories for your wall planning And that's going to give you a little bit of an idea of how you're incorporating all 5 of these perspectives into estimating not just the size of your work, not just your stories, but the impact. Right? So we talk about planning, we're talking about long-term institutional impact, and notice that that ties in with the sustainability goals pretty well, right? We go to the Agile Manifesto and we see this borne out in the relationship between manifesto planks and the SDGs, right? Things like decent work, reduced inequality, strong institutions, right? In agile environments, this principle shows up as safety, participatory planning, and shared ownership, right? Now, if you want to know how to do this hands-on, you can check out this essay on Medium that I have put together. And this tells you what I've done historically working with marginalized groups, including the one that I grew up in Appalachia. So I worked to create Georgia's first Appalachian Studies Center at the University of North Georgia, and we had a series of town hall meetings. And what we found is our initial buckets for planning shifted as a result of having feedback from the people who were involved. Right? And with that, I will shut up and take questions.
Well, if there are no questions, Casey, I've got one.
Yes, ma'am.
I've got one. So for you, where is the hardest part in the adoption, basically, within sustainability when you have an agile environment? I'm just trying to understand what are the essentials that we might need to think about.
Well, I think the first thing is being open to a broader perspective on what sustainability means, right? Because again, I think the way that we tend to construe it, we think about biodiversity, we think about waterways, we think about the Cuyahoga River fire or my hometown, and we can think more broadly about the human effects, right? Because ultimately, what we're trying to do with sustainability is make the world better for ourselves and for every other creature, right? So I think tying it to human needs, and then the biggest thing beyond that with anything else is fear. So overcoming your assumptions, overcoming your system one thoughts about what this is, and then secondly, addressing fear and vulnerability that comes from I don't know. Right. And the cool thing about I don't know is I don't know doesn't have to be some source of shame. I don't know can be an energy source for I get to find out how, right?
Yeah.
There's that slight shift, right? I have to from I have to I get to.
Well, again, thank you ever so much for this incredible insight and helping us to understand a bit more. Well, thinking outside the box, I believe, because it's really important nowadays. So thank you. We will now move to